Right. Okay. So let me start by giving you a overview of our plan today. So I'm going to spend a few minutes just briefly talking to you about a little bit about what is the economic tripos at Cambridge. I think this gives a sense of the expectations and the structure of the course here. I understand that a lot of you might be having to make a decision of what to study very soon. Then the main part of the webinar is that I give you an introduction on game theory. I give you a broad sense of what is a game theory, what is economic, and how they're related. And then we'll talk about two kinds of games in game theory. And if time permits, in the end, I will share with you what is study economic as a matter of design. I'll share with you a brief video made by the students. And in the end, I'll make sure to leave a few minutes just in case that you have any questions. So you should feel free to type any questions in the Q&A. And in the end, I'll look at these and answer any questions that you might have about Cambridge, about economics, anything in general. Right, without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing is that what is the economics tripos? This is just a stranger name for the undergrad degree in economics at Cambridge. So the degree, we train you in the following three aspects. You'll be learning economic theories. These are microeconomic and macroeconomic theories. You also be trained in quantitative methods such as statistics and econometrics, how to deal with data. So the overall idea is that you'll be equipped with techniques on economic theory models, as well as data analysis techniques, such that you can understand applications to real-world problems. So the theories and the data analysis tools, they're just methods for you to help you understand the real issues. So by the end of the degree, the objective is so that you be able to reason rigorously and communicate your ideas clearly based on theory and evidence. So economics is one of those causes that is very common for people to have misconceptions, misunderstanding of what it's really all about, and whether you've done economics or not before. A lot of you might have to decide what you want to apply and study for university degree, and I thought it might be helpful to show you my understanding of what the subject is really all about. So for those that haven't done economics before, a major understanding or conception about the subject is that it's about business, it's about how to make money. These are things that we do talk about in economics, but this isn't all about it. But for those of you that have done economics in A-level or IB or other degrees or the subjects, I think it's still common to have some misconception about the university level economics. You see that in A-level economics, the overall idea is to give you a high-level sense idea of the economic ideas. So you read a few paragraphs, you draw a few graphs, you write a few essays. A lot of people thought that that's what economics is all about. But the thing is that high-level ideas is taught without going in depth about the mathematical side of things, without the techniques. But at university level, especially in Cambridge, it is a very technically demanding course. You have to be comfortable with the math, with working with data. So it isn't just what you felt in A-level economics with just understanding graphs and texts. So in general, you might enjoy economics if you like mathematical models, use them to understand the mechanism, incentives. And this part is typically missing in the A-level education. And similarly, you might enjoy economics if you like analyzing data and evidence. Again, these two parts, the mathematical side of things and data analysis, these are the parts that are not present in A-level economics, and therefore it's important that you form the expectation that it is a very technically demanding, that you have to be comfortable with data, you have to be comfortable with mathematical equations, expressions. Math is essentially the language of economics. But obviously, we're not mathematicians. We don't just care about numbers and data. It's important that you're able to articulate your ideas clearly in writing and verbally, grounded in data and theories. So a strong economist is typically confident with numbers and formal reasoning. And this is the technical side of things, but also be able to communicate ideas, discuss, debate policy issues confidently. And finally, a lot of what we do in economics if you think about it simply, what we do is that you have some real-world phenomenon issue that you're curious, that you're trying to figure out the answer to, and then we map it to mathematical models. Then we work through the mathematical models, and then we derive mathematical results, and then we translate the mathematical results back into actual economic ideas, so to deepen understanding of the phenomenon. So it's important to have the ability of linking abstract models to real-world issues. In terms of prerequisites, it is required that you have done A-level mathematics or something equivalent. And it's very useful to have done further mathematics. It's not necessary, but very useful. And one interesting thing is that we don't require people to have prior training in economics. And it's useful, it's desirable, but it's not required. It's the quantitative ability that we look for when selecting candidates. Now, I'd like to say a few things about the teaching structure at Cambridge. So in Cambridge, you have a combination of lectures and supervisions. You're all very familiar with the style of lectures, where the lecturers introduce core concepts and techniques in large groups. Now, the unique teaching point of Cambridge is that we have a lot of supervisions. These are small group teaching with about 2 to 4 students. Now, the idea is that you'll be assigned homework. You have to attempt this homework. You do the problem set, you write essays in advance, and then your supervisors, whom are often leading experts in this field, will offer you tailored feedback to your work and also lead discussions in the session. So in the supervision, we train you the precision in reasoning. You're not just memorizing results that you learn from lectures. Then you practice the ability to map between maths, diagrams, and economic ideas. You have to articulate your ideas clearly in the supervisions. So this is an excellent opportunity for you to go beyond what is just taught in lectures, but you go really in depth into the subject. And besides lecture and supervision, these aren't just contact hours. You'll be expected to do a lot of independent study, which gives you a lot of flexibility. A few weeks ago, I was just counting with a new first-year student of mine, and we were counting the contact hours that you have to go to. I think it's around 18 to 20 hours a week for lectures and supervisions. So that means that you have lots of time that you can allocate to independent study, to read, to do problems, to revise, based on your own personal circumstance. So now let's talk a little bit about the degree structure here. So part 1, part 2A, part 2B, they're just straight names for first, second, and third year. So in the first year, the overall idea is to give you a broad foundation on the discipline. You have 5 compulsory papers: microeconomics, macroeconomics, and maths, and also that you have 2 contextual essay-based papers on political economy and economic history. So the overall idea is to train you not just quantitatively, not just train you the technical skills, but also they are essay-based papers so that you can understand the bigger pictures. You can learn how to articulate ideas clearly. But the thing is that you can see that I put 0% there. That means that formally, first year counts 0% towards your final degree. Now, the reason is that it's a very intense course here in Cambridge, and I think the first year is a very good opportunity for you to figure out how things work here. You have lectures, supervisions, you have to do homework, you have all the societies. It's a good opportunity to figure out how things work here and find your own way of navigating through them. And also that some of you might want to do a master's degree in the end. Some of you might want to go to finance, consultants in the end. It's a good opportunity to experiment with different things to figure out what is it that you want to do with your life. So this is more of the try and error year. And then when you reach second year, the part 2A, things get a little bit more serious. Now it counts towards 30% of your degree. And you have a little bit more freedom on your courses. So you have the 3 compulsory papers: microeconomics, macroeconomics, and econometrics. Now these are the core economics papers. But on top of that, you get to choose a specialist paper depending on your interest. You could choose, for example, labor economics. And this is studying how the labor market works. And you can look at trade and development. So why are some countries rich? Why are some countries poor? And what are the factors that affect economic growth? Or if you are very interested in theory, you can look at the more theoretical side of things, the math and stats. Now, in your third year, it's getting more serious. It's counting towards 70% of your degree, where you have more specialization and you have to do a piece of original research. Now, there are two compulsory papers now, advanced micro and the macro. Now, you get to choose two separate specialist papers. For example, you can choose industry to look at how firms behave, how firms compete. You can look at finance, how the money market work, etc. There are a number of optional papers that we offer here. Now, very importantly, this is a very good opportunity to conduct your own piece of research here. You have to write your undergraduate thesis. The idea is that you identify a question of your own interest. What are some questions that interest you in economics? And then you use your favorite method. You can use theories, you can use empirical analysis. Now, these are all things that we taught in the degree. Use your favorite method and then find out the answers to your own question. So this is a very good opportunity for you to actually make a contribution to the discipline of economics. You identify a original research question, you answer it, and you have complete freedom in this module, dissertation, and you have supervisors who are experts in the field that offer you high-level guidance on these projects. So if you're thinking of doing economics at university degree, for example, Cambridge, here are a couple of my suggestions that you could start to prepare now. I think the top priority is to make sure that you're confident in math. You should be confident and familiar with algebra, calculus, statistics. Math, in my view, is just the language of economics that we speak. And besides mathematics, you can also start to build a strong economic intuition. And the best way to build a strong economic intuition is to start to read introductory economic textbooks at university level. If you read this textbook, you get it's not about the knowledge or the technical details. It's about understanding the ways that economics think, the ways that economics deal with problems, so that you can build economic intuition. And also, very importantly, it's important to be able to articulate, express your ideas clearly, both verbally and in text. And finally, that goes without saying, is that it's important to understand the admission process. In Cambridge, for example, that if you apply to economics, you'd have to do this written test called TAMUA, which is to test your quantitative and mathematical ability. Then you'll be invited to interviews. So it's important to understand the admission process. Now, this is everything I want to talk about the introduction to the Cambridge Triples. Now, let's get into the fun stuff. I would like to talk about the introduction to game theory. So before we talk about the game theory, I would like to talk a bit about what is economics. So if I were to randomly pick someone up from the streets, someone that doesn't understand anything about economics, if I were to ask them, in your view, what do you think economics is all about? Now, a common answer that I might be getting is that it's all about money. It's all about buying and selling things. It's all about these big concepts, big words, and GDP, inflation, unemployment. I might get answers like, it's about telling you how to get rich. All of these, they're not wrong. They're absolutely correct, as a matter of fact, but they're not complete. So what is economics really all about? If you open up any A-level economics textbooks, there are different versions of the definition of the subject, economics. They're all around the efficient allocation of material goods. So an example is that economics is the study of how scarce resources are allocated efficiently. Let's just take a moment to think about what that means. What is scarce resources? So the subject, the discipline, exists because of the fact that we have scarcity in this world, right? Let's think about good that doesn't have scarcity, air, right? And there are infinite supply of air on Earth, and I can breathe as many air as I desire. There is no reason why you'd want to study the allocation of air. But in practice, in other contexts, I have a limited income, right? I can't just buy anything that I desire. I'd like to buy a yacht, I'd like to buy a mansion, but I can't afford them, right? If I go to Sainsbury, I have some money, and I can't just buy the entire Sainsbury. Now, it's important then I start to think about how should I allocate my limited income, wealth, on the goods that's in Sainsbury. So because of scarcity, then it's important that we start to think about what's the best way to allocate the limited resources. It doesn't have to be just about your wealth. Um, you could be a firm, you have some budget, and you want to produce something. You could be hiring workers, you could be renting capitals. Which one's cheaper? How would you like to go about it? You could be a government, you have some government budget, and then you can spend your budget on education, on national defense, on various all sorts of things. But you have a limited budget, and then it's important for the government to think about how should I allocate my resources. So the core idea of economic is that it's about the efficient allocation of resources, right? Efficiency being the key here. What's the best way to allocate resources? But you might notice that I've put here that it's pre-1950. So this is the prevalent definition in all high school textbooks, but unfortunately, it can be a little bit outdated to modern times. Now, the question is that what happened in 1950? In 1950, there is a substantial breakthrough in game theory by John Nash. It allowed game theory to be accepted as a core method in economics. So the word economics comes from the Greek word oikonomia. It means household management. Aristotle used to analyze how households and states should be governed, and people were studying justice, ethics, power, and the role of institutions. At the start, it was a very broad subject. It was considered as a moral and political philosophy. But at some points, economists started to stray away from this path, and we were just looking at markets and prices. We were looking at supply and demand, how markets work, how you buy and sell things. And this is essentially the allocation of resources. Now, the incorporation of game theory, the breakthrough of game theory, as a matter of fact, allowed us to bring economics back on path to study broader philosophical concerns of things instead of just market prices. So in modern time, a version of definition of economics is that it is the analysis of incentives in any social institution. Let's pause here to think about what is the analysis of incentives. Now, the key word here is incentives. What is incentives? To put it very simply, incentive is simply why do people do the things that they do? Or why do you make decisions that you make? Now, in modern time, in a lot of leading faculties, economics is considered as a decision science. It's decision theory. It's about understanding why do people make the decisions that we make. So the allocation of resources is also decision making, but decision making is concerned more than just the allocation of resources. So nowadays, in modern time, economics is a lot broader than just the allocation of resources, but it's on decision making. So what is game theory, and how does game theory advance our understanding of economics? I'd like to start with a quote by Sartre, which is the first principle of existentialism. We're nothing else but what we make of ourselves. Now, the way that I interpret it is that we are the choices that we make. We are formed by the choices that we make. Now, think about it for tonight. Right? You're here in this webinar. I'm here delivering this webinar. It is only because of the choices that we make. I've made the choice of studying economics for my undergrad degree. Then I've made the choice of studying economics for my postgraduate degree. Then I've made the choice of studying economics for a PhD degree. Then I made the choice to work here as a lecturer. Then I've made the choice of being here tonight delivering this webinar. This is on my side, but also on your side. I mean, you've made the choice to be here tonight. You could be watching movies, you could be playing golf, you could be doing lots of things tonight, and yet you chose to be here to listen to this session. So you see that we are here because of the choices that we make. So throughout our life, we make infinite number of choices. Now, some choices are very simple. For example, I have some money. I go to Sainsbury. I would like to buy some fruit, and there are apples, there are bananas. And I like apples, I don't like bananas, and I can afford both of them. I simply buy apples. I'm just buying the best goods that I can afford. This is the fundamental consumer theory. You buy the best goods that you can afford. It's as simple as that. There isn't too much thinking going on. I don't have to do any calculations or math to understand that I like apples. I can afford them. I just buy apples. But unfortunately, a lot of decisions are a lot more complex in the sense that it can depend on the actions of others. For example, in sports, let's think of the following scenario. Suppose that we're playing football and we are at the stage of penalty shots, and you're the attacker. You could either kick left, you could kick right, you could kick middle. What do you do? It depends on what you think the goalkeeper is doing. Is the goalkeeper defending left, right, or the middle? Similarly, for the goalkeeper, should I go left, right, or the middle? It depends on what the goalkeeper thinks that the attacker is doing. When you play poker, do you raise? Do you fold? Do you call? It depends on the action of others. Similarly, in auctions, you might see this a lot in movies, right? Someone you're bidding for a piece of art, and someone goes $1,000, and you go 1,001. Someone goes $2,000, you go 2,001. You see that what you're doing is based on what others is doing. This also applies for firm pricing. What's the price I should set depends on the pricing of my rivalry firms. It applies to war. Should I attack? Should I defend myself? Where should I attack? It depends on where you think your opponent is having their troops. Even how much effort you put into study, for example. Now, let's say that your goal is to be number one, is to be the first in your school. If all of your peers are investing minimal efforts, right, to study, you can just invest a little bit of effort to be the top. But if everyone is very hardworking, you might have to study very hard, even more, so that you can excel. Even how much you put effort you put into study. And these players that we've just seen can be individuals, they can be firms setting prices, or they can be countries, for example, fighting wars. They don't have just to be individuals, they can be collective entities such as firms, countries. And game theory is giving us the tool to think logically and strategically in these scenarios. And we call these scenarios where your actions depend on the actions of others. We call these scenarios strategic interactions. And formally, game theory is the study of mathematical models of strategic interaction among rational agents. Let us break it down a little bit. So this is the mathematical model. So game theory is a sub-branch of mathematics. And as I was saying that in economics, math is the language that we speak. It is important that you're able to work with maths. And this is the mathematical models of strategic interaction. And strategic interaction refers to the scenarios that I was talking about, where your optimal actions depend on the actions of others. Right? If there is no other player, you just go to Sainsbury. You just do the things that you like to do. There is no need to be overcomplicate things. So this is a scenario that it matters what others are doing. Finally, among rational agents. Now, this word rational is a very tricky and also very elegant word, and there are various definitions around. But the simple idea is that a rational player, you have some objective in your mind, and you use your available information to choose the action that maximize this objective. In economics, the common word for it is that you have some utility function, you have some utility from doing things, and you're making choices to maximize your utility. So this is game theory. Now, another way to put it is that it's just a theory about a game. So what exactly is a game? A game is defined by the following three elements. A game involves a set of players. So who are playing the games? A set of actions available to each player. So what are the players allowed to do? And finally, a preference relation of outcomes for each player. Right? What do you like? Right? It sounds abstract here, but you see that it's very simple. It's just that what do you like? What do you prefer? So you can almost think of it like a board game. A board game is a very nice example of a game. You have a bunch of friends playing the board game. And in this board game, for example, Catan, there are certain actions that you're allowed to do. You're allowed to build roads, you're allowed to build houses. And then there are rules determining how you would win. These are the preference relation. Now, let us look at the most classical game in game theory. to give you a sense of what a game is really all about. Now, let us consider the following scenario. Suppose a house is robbed and two suspects are caught. They were seen at the premise, and therefore there is sufficient evidence for trespassing, but not burglary because you can't find the stolen goods, you can't find their stash. And the idea is that these two suspects, they're put in isolated rooms and they can't communicate with the police officers. You see that these are the players, two suspects, and they can either confess to the crime of burglary or deny it. These are the actions they're allowed to do. You can either confess or deny to burglary. And finally, we need their preference relation. So the police officers offer the following deal to both of them. If one suspect confesses and the other denies, then the confessor goes free, just walk out of jail free because of the good attitude, and the other one rots in prison for 10 years. However, if both of them confess, they both get 5 years, and they get a bit of a reduced sentence instead of 10 years because of cooperation, they get 5 years. But if both of them deny, they both just get 1 year of sentence. They only charged for trespassing, but not burglary. Now, the best way to visualize, represent this game is to put it in a matrix. Let's see what that means here. So here, it means that the players, they're player 1 and player 2. And the action set, player 1 can either confess or deny. And player 2 can also either confess or deny. So these are the sets of players. And this is the action set. What are they allowed to do? And these numbers represent the corresponding outcomes of the actions. Let's start with the first one. If player 1 confessed, player 2 also confessed, then they go to prison at a reduced sentence of 5 years and 5 years, both of them. But if player 1 confesses, but player 2 denies, then player 1 goes free and therefore gets 0 years in prison, while player 2 gets 10 years of sentences. If player 1 denies and player 2 confesses, player 1 is going to get 10 years, but player 2 is going to walk out free. The final scenario is that if both of them deny, they get charged for trespassing only and get 1 year and 1 year each. Now, this is a very visual way of representing the scenario. And my question is that let's suppose that you're player 1 and your self-interest. That means that you don't care about player 2, you're just caring about your own interest. You're trying to minimize your prison time. What would you do? I'm just going to pause here for a minute so that you can think about it and think a little bit about if you're player 1, what would you do? Now, in a minute, the police officer is going to come to you and ask, do you confess or deny? And take a minute to look at these matrix and think about the choice that you're going to make. And then in a minute, we'll discuss it. Right. Hopefully that you've made your decisions now. My speculation is that some of you went for confess, but some of you went for deny. Let us find out what is the rational thing here to do. Now, the only rational thing to do here is to confess. You'd confess at any time of the day. Let us understand why. Now, let's say that we are player 1. Now, there are 2 possibilities. Possibility 1, player 2 is confessing. Possibility 2, player 2 is denying. In the state of the world where player 2 has confessed, if I confess, I get 5 years. If I deny, I'm going to rot in prison for 10 years. And it goes without saying that I should confess here. Now, in the state of the world where player 2 has denied, if I simply confess, I get to walk out of jail for free. I'm a free man now. If I deny, I'm going to get charged for trespassing and stay 1 year in prison. So you see that in any state of the world, regardless of what the other player does, it's always beneficial for player 1 to confess. Now, the same logical reasoning applies for player 2. If you think about player 2, in the event that player 1 confess, if player 2 confess, player 2 gets 5 years. Denying gives a 10 years. Player 2 should confess in this scenario. In the scenario that player 1 has denied confession, use 0 years, but deny use 1 year. Also, the same logic applies for player 2. Player 2 should also confess. Now, this is the only rational thing to do. Suppose that these players are rational and care about themselves only. So the inevitable outcome is that both suspects will confess. This is precisely the idea of this present dilemma, is that you caught two suspects, but you don't have evidence for burglary. You put them into separate rooms, and if they're being rational, they will confess, and they get their sentences. And this is the rationale of adopting it at police stations. But then, now let's think about it from the perspective of the suspect. Now, suppose that, let's say that you're the head of mafia, you're the boss of these two suspects. Is the outcome optimal for them? Is it the best that they could do? Now, the answer is no. The reason is that the inevitable outcome is that they both confess and stay in prison for 5 years. Well, you see that it's perfectly possible that they could just deny and end up with just having 1 year in prison instead of 5 years. Not only on the aggregate level, they're better off. Each of them is better off. So they, out of rational choices, they end up with the outcome that isn't aggregately optimal. Now, the natural question that we might want to ask is that, can they just simply agree to deny and both be better off? I mean, we suppose that the first time we both confessed and we got 5 years in prison. After 5 years, we walk out of prison and we commit another crime and end up in the same scenario. Could we this time just agree that we deny, and so that we just get 1 year to 5 years? And unfortunately, it's not possible. The reason is that even if, let's say that we can communicate, we've agreed that we're just going to deny this time. We're going to remain silent all the time. But you see that, suppose that I'm player 1, knowing that player 2 is going to deny. If I were to betray player 2 and confess, I could just walk out free. Now, the same incentive applies to player 2. Knowing that player 1 is going to deny, I can just confess and walk out free. So both of them would have an incentive to betray each other, even if they've agreed to deny in the first place. So again, the inevitable outcome in the end is that they just both confess. And now I'm going to invite you to think about the following question. Now, you see that the inevitable outcome is that they've both confessed, while a better outcome is that they both just deny. Suppose that you're the boss of these two criminals. How could you induce the best outcome of mutual denial? You see that this is the reason, before we talk about the answer to it, I'm just going to give you a high-level picture of how it maps to economics. As we talked about, that economics is the analysis of incentives. Right? We're trying to understand, why do people make the decisions that they make, but why do we care about that? Now, the high-level idea, not just for economics, perhaps some other social sciences, is that we're trying to understand, why do people do the things that they do, so that we can understand the functioning of human society, so that we can try to intervene and make the world a better place. Now, this is a perfect example to illustrate this idea. You see that we've understood the incentives of the people. We've understood that rational players will choose confess, but we've established that confess isn't the optimal outcome for both of them. And then we start to think about policy interventions. What is a good way to intervene so that we introduce the good outcome? The short answer is that you could just punish confession. You could say to these suspects, for any rat, for anyone that confesses, you're going to suffer punishment. We're going to come after your family. We're going to come after you for the rest of your life. So the idea is that there will be some consequence of confession. Let's, for example, say that the consequence is so extreme that you'll be hunted down, so that it's equivalent to infinite prison sentence. Then what happens to the table here is that you see on top, confession. Originally, you're getting 5 years each, but now because you'll be hunted down by the mafia, is equivalent to infinite prison sentence, and then we change it to infinity. And similarly here, and this is a scenario that player one has confessed and player one gets infinite sentence. And this is a scenario that player two has confessed and player two gets infinite sentence. So you see that now that we've changed the numbers because of the external punishment, let us see what's going to be the outcome of the game. If we look at player one, right, if I confess, I'm going to get infinite sentence because I'm going to be hunted down. But if I deny, I'm going to get some fixed amount of prison sentence, right? In any case, it's better than being hunted down by the mafia. And the same logic applies for player two. So now player one is going to choose deny. Player two is also going to choose deny. So we've managed to move from the suboptimal outcome of confession to the socially optimal outcome of deny. By socially optimal, I don't mean for the science, I mean for these two players at least. So this is a very nice example to illustrate that we try to understand the incentives of why do people do the things that they do, such that we understand the outcome. And then we can think about ways that we can intervene to improve the outcome of the society. Now, you might find it a bit strange that why are we talking about criminals? This is just a specific context that represents a very broad type of games. So the prison dilemma isn't just about this specific scenario, but it's all about situations where rational decision-making leads to dominant but suboptimal outcome. In this scenario, the rational choice is to confess. It's dominant. You'd always do it. And yet, it's not optimal for the both suspects. And so the prison dilemma is representing these type of games where rational decision-making leads to suboptimal outcome. And in this scenario, external intervention can improve outcomes by altering incentives. This is also the whole premise of economics, that we're trying to understand incentives so that we can make intervention to improve the outcome. Now let us look at the other scenarios that we could apply prison dilemma. It isn't just about these two criminals. So the first scenario we can think about is firm pricing, where there are two firms. The firms could either set low or high prices. In this scenario, you can think of low prices as confess and high prices as deny. The optimal outcome for both firms is that both of them set high prices so that they have very high profits overall. However, the issue here is that if both firms have agreed that we're going to set high prices, there is an incentive to undercut the other firm by going to the low price. It's as if in the prison dilemma, you'd like to betray each other by going for confess. So the optimal outcome is that both set high prices with high profits, but in practice, the inevitable outcome is that you'd have incentive to undercut each other and enter into price war, which is harmful for both firms. Another scenario is the arm races. Right? Suppose that you have two countries, and you can either build arm or disarm. The optimal outcome is that there is a mutual disarmament, so that there is peace in the world. But then you would have an incentive to outgun the opponents by build up the arms. And this applies for both parties, and you end up with costly build-up in the end. It also applies for gang rivalries. Suppose there are two gangs. You can either attack each other or you can keep peace. The optimal outcome for both of them is that they both choose peace, so there is stability. No one just attacks each other, everyone's happy. But then, knowing that the other gang is sort of keeping peace, you'd be better off having preemptive strikes. And that applies to both parties, and we end up with escalation of violence. So these are scenarios where rational decision-making leads to a dominance and yet suboptimal outcomes. And then we can think about ways that we could intervene to increase the outcomes in these scenarios. So at the end, I would like to briefly talk about another type of games. You see that in the prison dilemma, there is incentive to betray each other. But there are scenarios where you have aligned interests, right? You have aligned interests that you want to cooperate. Even in those scenarios, you'd have issues of maintaining the optimal outcome. In prison dilemma, the issue is that at the optimal outcome, there is incentive to betray each other. But there are scenarios that suppose that there isn't any incentive to betray each other. You have aligned interest, but still, there are issues that preventing us from doing the socially optimal outcomes. Now, let's think about the following simple scenario. Suppose that you're a student at Cambridge Summer School, and there are two events that you can attend tonight. You can either go to the evening punting on the River Cam, or that you can dine at the formal hall at Mary Edwards, which is very nice, by the way. And let's say that Rose prefers punting, while Jack prefers the formal hall. And Rose would like to see nice views on the river, and Jack would like to enjoy some nice food at the formal. Now, they have a crush on each other, therefore they would like to go to the same event and would be very disappointed otherwise. Now, however, the issue is that they've just met each other on the first day, therefore they're a bit too shy to ask each other, and therefore they must decide independently without asking. Let's just put it into table as we did earlier. So Jack and Rose can either go to formal or you can go to punting, and so does Rose. Now let's think about these numbers. So in the event that they both go to formal hall, right, they get to see each other. Let's say that they get a benefit of 2 by seeing each other. And on top of that, because Jack enjoys the formal, Jack gets additional benefit, 1 additional benefit of going to the formal. So this is a scenario where Jack gets 3 and Rose gets 2 for seeing each other. And if we think about the next scenario of formal and punting, this is a scenario that Jack goes to the formal and Rose goes to the punting. So each of them gets 1 benefit of doing the things that they like, but they don't get to see each other, and therefore everyone gets 1-1. And let's move on to punting and formal. So this is unfortunately a scenario that Jack went to the punting for Rose and Rose went to the formal for Jack, but they don't see each other. So you end up not seeing each other while not doing the things that you like. Everyone gets 0. And the final scenario is that punting. So both of them went to punting, so they saw each other and it gets 2. And Rose enjoys punting, therefore gets additional benefits of 3. Again, similarly, you can decide whether you want to be Jack or Rose. And I'm going to pause just for a minute, just so that you can think a little bit about the choices that you would make. What would you do? Right. So my speculation is that some of you went for formal, some of you went to punting, but some of you might be struggling of making a choice, which is very natural. This is a scenario that you just don't have a single best action. The reason is that your optimal choice depends on what you think the other player will do. I suppose, let's say we're Jack. Okay, now if I think that perhaps, for example, that Rose also has a crush on me and therefore might go to the formal hall to see me. In this scenario, I'd happily go to the formal hall. But perhaps there is a scenario that I don't think that Rose is interested in me and therefore Rose is just going to go to the punting. Now, in this scenario, as Jack, I should go to punting to see her. But you see that it's not just as simple as that. Perhaps that Rose is interested in me, but Rose thinks that I'm not interested in her and therefore is going to the formal hall. So you see that it depends on what you think the other player is thinking and what you think that the other player is thinking that you're thinking. It gets very complicated very soon. It's all about different degrees of rationality. But if your idea is that you don't have a single best choice as we did in the present dilemma, you just prefer to confess in any stage of the world. But this is not the case here, unfortunately. It's very possible to be struggling making a choice here. I mean, as a matter of fact, you don't have a best choice unless you know precisely what the other player is doing, but you don't here. So you see that here it's perfectly possible that you end up with the bad outcomes of missing each other. Now, the reason that coordination is difficult here is that there are multiple desirable outcomes. In the outcome that you both go to the formal and you both go to punting are all perfect outcomes, but there are 2 of them, and you don't know what the other player is thinking, and therefore you might end up missing each other. So the difficulty arises because the fact that your optimal choice depends on the other's choice, and sometimes it's possible that you don't have the correct belief of the choice of others. So to solve the coordination problems, right, so there are various ways that in practice. One, the simplest way that you can just agree in advance. And um, there are also social norms that help with the cognition problems. For example, that um, when you drive on the road in the UK, you just drive on the left. This is just shared expectations. And also there are institutional rules that help align expectations to make sure that we don't have coordination problems. There are laws, standards, timetables, so there are multiple outcomes, multiple good outcomes, and we agree on which one is the one that we should go for. And these are methods that we avoid the coordination problems. So the economic idea here is that we can have institutions to help societies to coordinate on good outcomes. This again go back to the premise of economics that we're trying to understand the incentives of the people, so the institutions could get involved and intervene and make the society a better place. This scenario solving the coordination problem. Now, so the main takeaway today is that game theory is studying strategic interactions where outcomes depend on the actions of others. And the key takeaway for the games today is that rational behavior doesn't always lead to good outcomes. In the prison dilemma, you have incentives. Because of rationality, you would have incentives to deviate from the good outcomes of mutual denial. In the coordination games, even if you behave rationally, right, you could still have miss each other because of misaligned expectations. And institutions can intervene to improve the outcomes by shaping the incentives of the players and expectations. So the very big picture today is that economics isn't just about prices and markets. It's about incentives and decision making. For example, in the games we look at, there is absolutely no resources to be allocated. We're trying to understand the choices of people. So I think this is a question that a lot of people are curious about, what's happened in interviews. I mean, it can sound scary, but it's not as scary as you might expect. So the idea of interview is that, as we talked about, that we have supervisions, more group teaching supervisions in Cambridge when for students here, and the idea of interview is that you're simply almost like you're having a mock supervision. You're just having a friendly academic chat with the lecturers, with the teachers, with the fellows here. And so we'll propose a couple of problems and we'll guide you through these problems and you attempt these problems. And, and throughout the process, we're trying to assess your academic potential. So the best way to practice for the interviews, right? I think that I get this question a lot. And let's think of the following scenario that let's say that suppose that you are a non-native English speaker, and in a year time, in 2 years' time, you're going to meet an English native speaker, and she's going to assess your English ability. And the best way to prepare for that is to actually speak the language, is to be able to speak the language, right? I wouldn't advise, right, that a lot of people focus on techniques, interviews, and these are not the first order things. I mean, if you actually speak economics, if you actually have strong quantitative backgrounds, if you actually have solid economic intuition, you excel. It's absolutely certain that you will excel. And practically, one is to make sure that you're confident with your course mathematics. Two is that try to start to read some university level of economics textbooks. And in the Faculty of Economics, we publish a list of recommended readings, which are textbooks that we've used for first year students. I think this is a very good way to practice, to prepare. To start with, the similarity is that in economics, you have to work a lot with maths. It's a prerequisite, it's very important. But the difference is that maths is the language, is the tool for economics, but this is not the purpose, right? A lot of people have the tendency in economics, they could drown themselves in the techniques, in the mathematical models. Remember that isn't the point of economics. These are just tools to answer, to help you understand real world application, to help you understand the real society, the real world. So I think you can ask yourself the question that I'm sure that the fact that you're asking this question is because that you love mathematical side of things. But do you just enjoy working with the puzzles, the mathematical theories alone, or do you enjoy um, applying these techniques, these things, to be able to debate policy issues, to be able to articulate ideas about the real world? I think the major difference lies here. I think this is a very nice question. So I should say that this personal statement, as the name suggests, is personal to you. Obviously, there is no single right way of doing it. It depends on your personal interest in economics. I don't think that I don't think there would be issues if you write any topics in economics. You can write game theory, you can write anything that you desire, as long as it's actually something that interests you. My suggestion of personal statement is that there is a lot of personal statement that I've read is that a lot of people they drown themselves in technical side of things, right? There is this theorem, I'm doing this math problem, but as I was saying that it isn't the techniques, it isn't the mathematics, it's necessary prerequisite, but isn't the point. The point is that we would like to see that you're able to express high level, important, interesting ideas and these math side of things, the technical side of things, they're just methods, but they're not the purpose. So I think that an undergraduate academic degree here, now the reason that I think is very strong, there are two main reasons for it. One major reason is, as mentioned, the fact that there are supervisions. Now, the idea of supervision is that you are actually able to sit down with world-class economists, experts in their field, to talk about ideas, to talk about um, anything that interests you on a weekly basis. And I think this is going to be an issue in other universities that you go to a lecture with 300 people. You don't get to talk, discuss closely with experts. I think this is going to really increase. There's going to increase your potential. There are very clever undergrad students that they have research ideas. They talk about them with their supervisors in supervisions, and they end up working together on this frontier research. And the second reason is that um, in the modern time, some of you might, there is a trend that economics is getting very mathematical, very data oriented. That a lot of people use AI. Everyone's talking about AI nowadays. People talk about machine learning. It's getting very technical, very data oriented. But in Cambridge, we make sure that the contextual papers, the political economy, the economic history, they're all part of your compulsory training so that you can think about the philosophical side of things. Um, as I said, that this AI, the machine learning, these techniques, they're not the purpose of things. Now, it's going to be very um, tedious if you know all of the techniques, but you can't ask the right questions. So I think another major selling point is that we train you, we make sure that we train you qualitatively. You're able to articulate think about important ideas besides just technical side of things. Econometrics, so on a high level, is that in statistics, right, we borrow a lot of techniques from statistics to understand economic issues. This is econometrics. But the nature, the essence of econometrics is that you're trying to understand the causal relationship of things. You're trying to understand how does A affect B, right? You're trying to understand how does education affect your wage, and how does institution affect the development of the economy. It doesn't have to be economic issue. It could be any two things. You're trying to understand the causal relationship of any two things. And going back to the high level premise of economics, that if you understand the relationship of things, you understand how the society functions, then you can intervene to make it a better place. My personal advice is that you should absolutely choose the things that you find the most interesting. But from a economics perspective, suppose that you're preparing for university application for economics, I think that we typically like subjects that are very quantitative. It doesn't have to be economics, mathematics, economics, physics, natural sciences, any quantitative subject would be very useful. First of all, let me assure you that it's absolutely fine that you don't have economics as a A-level subject. As I said, that it's definitely not one of our prerequisites for entry. I think the best way to study economics in your own time is you could go on our faculty website. There is a list of suggested readings. Um, pick any, pick an introductory textbook. I think it's going to be very helpful. And my personal favorite introductory textbook in economy is called Intermediate Microeconomics by Hall and Varian. But this is a very interesting question. So in practice, we have a very holistic approach of assessing each candidate. We are going to review everything that you've submitted. We're going to look at your scores. We're going to look at your interview. We're going to look at your grades. We're going to look at your personal statements and a lot of other documents they submitted. It's not going to be a fixed ratio, but we look at from a very holistic approach. We do take a very long time to review each application very carefully. This is actually a fantastic question. The answer is it's entirely up to your own personal taste. Um, there are different types of economists, for example, in Cambridge. Um, I am myself a micro theorist, where I mainly look at economic theories. But there are also people, researchers in the empirical microeconomics group, where what they do is that they use empirical data, they use empirical evidence to understand real world issues. So they are theorists, they are empirical researchers. There is no the right thing to do. It really is all about what interests you. This is a very nice question. Um, I don't think it's about the knowledge. I think it's important to understand the thinking behind it, not just reading a book. I would say that even if your university degree here, right, so you study here for 3 years, and let's say that after you graduate for 10 years, you're not going to remember a single thing that you've been taught here. It's never the knowledge that matters, right? You're not going to remember the names of the theories. What's important is that you've been trained to think like an economist. You've been trained to think in an economist way. It's the way of to think about things. I think that just matters a lot more than the specific knowledge. It's not about the specific number. It's not about the names of theories. It's about the way to think about it. You see that the fundamental, you see that the different subjects, I would say that different subjects have their core logical way of thinking. In economics, my personal view is that we always think about optimization. Give me a fixed amount of money. What's the best way to allocate them? We have some budget and government. What's the best way to allocate them? I have some time. What's the best way to allocate them? It's always we're always trying to optimize things. I think this is the essence of this is nature of the logic of economics. I think this is a very nice question. So tell you the answer to let me tell you the answer to it in a short word. The answer is no. If you were to ask two two people to play the prison dilemma, is it necessarily true that they'll both choose confess? The answer is no. Right? I'm sure that lots of you, perhaps you didn't choose confess. You probably went for deny and then rot in prison, but perhaps you didn't choose to confess. So if you ask two people to play the present element, do they confess? Not necessarily so. Then the interesting question is that why do we study game theory? Why do we study economics? But but first order issue is that why was that the case? So why is it that people don't necessarily choose confess? Now the straightforward answer is that we are assuming we are studying rational agents, but not every individual in the economy is rational. So this raises a more high-level question, right? Why do we bother studying economics? I mean, not just in game theory, in the entire economics, you start by assuming that we have some rational agents, rational consumers, rational people, and we develop all these theories of consumer theory, producer theory, all based on this unrealistic assumption of rationality. Why do we bother studying it? Now, the answer is that it depends on our task. We are not trying to make individual level predictions. Our task, our goal is to make market level predictions. Let me give an example. So if you study A-level economics, the first thing you learn is that when price goes up, the demand goes down. You buy less when it's more expensive. But if you think about it, suppose that there is a rise in price of a particular good. Does each individual necessarily buy less of it? Not necessarily so, because not everyone is rational. We're not, but the thing is that we're not trying to make individual level predictions. We're interested in the market. But in the entire market, there are a zillion ways you could behave irrationally. You could buy less, you could buy more, you could buy a lot more, a lot less. But there is only one way to act rationally. So all these zillion ways of irrationality, they almost cancel out in the market. So the market would behave as if it is a choice made by one representative rational agent. So when the price of something goes up, you don't necessarily buy less. I don't necessarily buy less. But on the entire market, it's going to go down. So then the answer to this question is that it's not realistic to treat just two single firms and we predict that they will do what the game theory predicts. We're not making accurate personal level predictions. But on the aggregate market, yes, and our theories, our results would be very accurate in predicting the market level activities. Right, I'm afraid that this is all we have time for today. It's very nice talking to all of you. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your evening. I might even see some of you in Cambridge.